I did, signed specifically to me for my 60th birthday by Dabo Sweeney himself.
That's what I thought.
That's a nice gift. Good for you, Doug. I might have wished you guys had lost, but that's still a good gift.
Okay, we've got, let's see, who are we waiting on? Mr. Blake. There he is. I'd say we got about 1 minute to go. Okay. I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council, June 1st, 2020 to order. Janine, please call the roll.
Mr. Rath? Mr. Rath?
Here, can you hear me?
I can. Mr. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Bob?
Here.
Mr. Fennell?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Labutus?
Here.
Mr. Lang?
Present.
Mr. Marmee?
Present.
We have all here present this evening. Next on the agenda, we have the invocation by Mr. Blake.
May you bow your heads. Lord Almighty, we humble ourselves in your presence, asking for guidance and strength and wisdom. We ask that your grace be cast upon the people of Newark. Our citizens are hurting. Many of our people, your children, are struggling to pay rent. Many are in need of work. Poverty in our cities increased. The safety and health concerns of being healthy and staying healthy during the reality of an attack by a virus. And Lord, many of our people need your love to fight right relationship, to find right relationship with one another, to be in peace. And we find ways to come together as one people, regardless of the color of our skin. We know that you only give us challenges which you know we can overcome. We are forever grateful to you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jeremy. That was very nice. Next, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We should have a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Spencer, I didn't get a flag.
I had mine up there.
What was that?
It's out there, I promise. I hit share on it. There.
Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's the thing for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda. Does anyone have anything? Okay. Move on to a motion to accept our minutes of our May 18th, 2020 meeting.
Motion.
Motion. Second.
Second by Mr. Barker. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thumbs up. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. That passes. We have no appointments this evening. We have two reports of standing committees, one from finance and one from service. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have one communication from AEP Ohio, the intention to file an application to adjust distribution rates to the PUCO of Ohio, which probably means our rates are going up a little bit. Next, we move on to ordinances on the second reading, 20-16. Janine?
Ordinance number 20-16 by Mr. Bub, an ordinance setting compensation and stating policy with respect to certain positions within the office of the clerk of the Licking County Municipal Court of the city of Newark, Ohio, and repealing all ordinances and resolutions in conflict.
You've heard the second reading of 20-16. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bub?
I'll move that we adopt ordinance 20-16.
Motion by Mr. Bub,
Second.
second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-16? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath? Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-16 passes 10-0. There are no ordinances on the first reading this evening. Next, we move to resolutions on the second reading, 20-29.
Resolution number 20-29 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to submit an application to the Ohio Department of Public Safety Office for federal fiscal year 2021 Ohio Traffic Safety Grants Programs, Selective Traffic Enforcement Program STEP, the Impaired Driving Enforcement Program IDEP, and the Drugged Driving Enforcement Program DDEP.
You've heard the second reading of 20-29. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee,
I make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-29.
motion by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Lang. Is there any discussion on 20-29? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-29 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-30.
Resolution number 20-30 by Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to accept bids and lease certain real estate now owned by the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring that such property is no longer needed but for any municipal reason.
You've heard the second reading of 20-30. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath,
I can make a motion to adopt 20-30.
motion by Mr. Rath,
I'll second that.
second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-30? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-30 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-31.
Resolution number 20-31 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 20-31. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee,
I make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-31.
motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-31? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath, Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-31 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-32.
Resolution number 20-32 by Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 20-32. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lang.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-32.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Lang,
Second.
second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-32? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
20-32 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-34.
Resolution number 20-34 by Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to apply for funding from the United States Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance under the Bulletproof Vest Partnership Grant Program.
You've heard the second reading of 20-34. What is your wish?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-34.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by
Second that.
Mr. Bub. Is there any discussion on 20-34? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-34 passes 10-0. Next, we move on to resolutions on the first reading, 20-35.
Resolution number 20-35, expedite by Mr. Marmee, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
20-35 is on its
Mr.
first.
President,
Mr. Marmee,
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 20-35.
motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee,
I'll second that.
second by Mr. Bub. Mr. Marmee,
Thank you, Mr. President. These funds are what we collect for the JED Z1. And so we need to get them to the appropriate entities because they definitely need their money in order to make sure that they're funded correctly. So we try to expedite these so then we can distribute them as quickly as possible. Thank you.
great. Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Janine, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
The 2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee,
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-35.
motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee,
Second.
second by Mr. Bub. Any other discussion on 20-35? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee.
Yes.
20-35 passes 10-0. And that concludes our legislation this evening. Thank you. Next, we move on to miscellaneous. Do we have any city officials that would like to speak? Our Honorable Law Director Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought I should note that the Law Director's Office, as of this past Friday, is back to full staff and full-time every day. Our office never really closed, as the clerk can share. The need for law enforcement never really stopped, despite the quarantine. Many of us were able to work from home. Most of us took a turn in the office. But the business of our office, of the Law Director's Office, really would have come to a screeching halt if it wasn't for the selfless and really extraordinary efforts of our office manager, Cindy Campbell, and of Casey Osborne. The work of City Hall and sometimes the court and my office kind of goes unseen. So if you have the opportunity, please take a moment, thank them for the commitment, for the effort that they made to keep the office going under some very strange circumstances, to let them know that their efforts were appreciated. I think they would appreciate that. I know I certainly do. I think that Marcia Phelps probably feels the same way about her staff, because as much as we wanted to quarantine, crime marches on, and we did what we had to do. But if it hadn't been really for those two individuals particularly, everyone in our office stepped up. But if it hadn't been for Cindy Campbell and Casey Osborne in particular, we would have had a very, very difficult time navigating the last 12 weeks. So I thank them very much, and I'd appreciate it if you took a moment to do so as well. So with that, Mr. President, I will pass.
On your mute.
Thank you, Director Sassen. Mayor Hall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll just kind of extend that too across all the employees of the city. Once again, we can't thank them enough for all they're doing. Obviously, they have concerns at home, concerns at work, operating under different conditions, and it is quite different. But they've done a yeoman's job in so many ways. I'd expect no less because they're all so great, and that's nice. One other thing, real quick, I was fortunate last week to join a small group Q&A session with the 4 finalists for the Newark City School Superintendent. 1 was an internal candidate, and 3 were external current superintendents. Today it was announced that David Lewis with the Miami Trace Local Schools, which is in Washington Courthouse, will be replacing Doug Youth. That's not effective till January 1st of 2021. But I will pass on. All the finalists are outstanding, and David is outstanding, and I think we'll welcome him and look forward. While it's still several months away, he'll be a nice fit in our community and been very successful where he's at, and we're looking forward to welcome him into the school system. All the external candidates had very generous comments, not only about the school system, but about the city in general, and everybody should pat themselves on the back in this city that attracts such great candidates. With that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rath.
I didn't know exactly where I'm supposed to come in at.
Well, you missed your spot, but go ahead. We'll let you go now.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed my spot. That's not the first time. I just want to thank everybody for supporting Ordinance 2016. I certainly appreciate that. It's, really to correct and oversight when the other department people received that. My chief deputy was not included. And I also want to thank all the employees in the court and the clerk's office for everything that they've been doing over the past weeks. We've been half-staff and trying to retrofit the office. And I like to thank the city of Newark for the support that they've given me to be able to put up some screening in there and some plexiglass so that we can at least attempt to have space between each of the employees and then all those visiting our office. So it has been a labor of love somewhat, but also a worry because while everybody else got to stay home, we were there working just as Law Director Sassen stated. And we certainly owe our appreciation to all those people that continue to come into the office when they did and continue to set out cases. And we're probably around 700 cases that were backlogged. But effective today, we began our open hours, full-time, full staff. And tomorrow, City Hall probably will see several people coming into the building to be handling all of the backlogged arraignments and some of the backlogged cases and just current cases that are being filed in our office. But it has been with the cooperation of the Law Director's Office, helping with some of those cases, bringing them in. Also with the City of Newark, David Rhodes helping me along with the with some funding for some plexiglass and dividers. And we have all of our benches marked, so we hope tomorrow will go smoothly. The security people are ready and up and running, and the bailiffs are too. So keep our fingers crossed we're not inundated too much with people tomorrow. Thanks everybody for your support.
Thank you, Marcia. Mr. Rath?
Thank you. Just wanted to, first off, let me call a service committee meeting for 2 weeks from tonight. Wanted to say that we had some protests that went on in the city of Newark this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. I happened to be around both of those. They were very quiet, very nice, very peaceful, and that was awesome. And if we have further protests in the city of Newark, I hope to go as well and continue to spread their message. I understand we may have some visitors in our town tomorrow. I would have hoped to have heard more about that tonight, but I just want to remind everybody that let cooler heads prevail. And while property is important, your health and your life is way more important than that. So I hope everybody stays safe. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Barger?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just would like to echo the thanks that the mayor gave to the city staff and to the administration for, it's not necessarily a time to slack, and no one has, and the city has kept moving forward. So I greatly appreciate their leadership with their employees and their departments. And I also would like to thank Director Rhodes. He's been extremely, honest when there's a problem within the city, or I have a question about, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that during this pandemic? So I appreciate that very much as a new council member. And with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll call a Rules Committee meeting for 2 weeks to continue the discussion that we began tonight. And so get that on the calendar. And then I just think that one of the most important parts of our job as elected officials is to work with our constituents to help find a solution to their problem. And as with all of you, I know that you get phone calls and emails asking questions and seeking direction. And I've been working with one of my constituents in my ward, Mr. Matt Gayhart. And Mr. Gayhart has an interesting issue with a vacant vehicle becoming a nuisance. And I'm awaiting from the Department of Public Safety some suggested dates and times when we can meet with Mr. Gayhart and myself. And I know that we can have a virtual meeting so that we can all talk about this concern related to this vacant vehicle. But I wanted to bring this idea forward because I know other members of council may have also received phone calls related to vacant vehicles. And so if you have, please reach out to me and I'll include you on the conversation once I receive some dates and times from the Department of Public Safety so we can have a meeting. Next, Mr. President, I wanted to discuss sort of an inactive commission that I hope that we can reactivate, and that's the Human Relations Commission. Chapter 632 of our city ordinance discusses the Human Relations Commission, and the purpose of that commission being to promote mutual understanding and respect among all racial, religious, nationality, cultural, and ethnic groups within our city. And I hope that we can reactivate that group. And if there are citizens, which are people of goodwill and willing to serve our city on this commission, I ask that they come forward. It seems to me that this commission has been active long enough and it should become active once again. And then lastly, Mr. President, I just want to point us all towards the Newark Advocate reported on May 20th that there will be an examination of candidates for the police chief. And, folks, this is our police chief's our city's top cop. And I would hope that the finalists for this position can be introduced to the residents, and there should be some public feedback regarding the finalists before the hiring decisions made. Similar as to what happened with the Newark School Superintendent. The finalists were brought forward and there was public input. I think something similar with our city's police chief, and that process should also be entertained. What's this person's philosophy on race relations? What's this person's viewpoint on community policing? What's this person's thoughts on the homelessness and drug addiction and mental health in our community? There's questions that can be asked, which I think have community interest, broader community interest, and the public should be a part of that hiring process. And with that, thank you, Mr. President, and I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bub.
I will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Mr. Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start just by thanking all of the city employees for all of their dedication and their hard work during this time. To keep the city running during a pandemic is no small feat, and I hope that they know that I sincerely appreciate it and know how difficult that is. Many of you know that I work at a public library, and so I can directly empathize about what it's like trying to balance public health with providing services, and the dedication of the city employees have been commendable, and I just wanted to make sure that that was said. And I also appreciate my fellow members of council and city staff members who have been working to come up with really great solutions for us to continue council in a safe way that protects the health of our community and of council members, so that we can keep having productive council members in council meetings moving forward. I also just wanted to say that I think a lot of us probably spent the weekend watching some pretty terrible footage of our cities across the nation. And I understand that there is so much anger out there and so many emotions. And I wanted to commend again the people of Newark in the way that they expressed themselves, and for the protest that happened on the square. It was peaceful. I wasn't able to attend, but I was able to watch it on Facebook Live. And I just really wanted to commend the people of Newark. I'm continually impressed with the city that I get to serve. And with that, I will yield.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. Ms. Hall.
Yes, I can kind of ditto what everyone has said already. I want to thank the city people for coming in, the employees for coming in and keeping everything flowing and working well, as well as the clerk's office. Thank you for your help as usual. And I just want everybody to be well and be safe. I turn the news on and then I can't watch it, but then I don't want to not watch it. Keep going back and forth. It's very stressful, I think, for me, for a lot of people. So it'll be kind of nice to get back in chambers, even if we're 6 feet apart. So I think most of us miss that. I know my students miss their classes at Heritage Hall. They're waiting for approval from the governor to reopen slowly. So we've been talking about that as well. So everyone be safe and take care, and see you in a couple weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Harris.
Yeah, I need to thank BJ Varner from the traffic department for helping me get some lights fixed on some streets that I got some phone calls on. And also want to thank Detective Conley from the police department for helping me with a problem that was going on in the second ward. He was able to help me solve it. So I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Labutus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to take a moment, as some others had mentioned, to thank the employees of the city for keeping the city running. Obviously, even in the midst of a pandemic, the city can't shut down, and those services still need to continue on. So thank you for your service there. Secondly, as others have mentioned, kind of dovetailing off what Mr. Rath said, as we watch things happen on the news, there's protests that are here as well. Just overall, I'd ask that we look back and take into account the value of life and how short it is and how quick it is and how blessed we are to have that and be able to have a life and live of wildlife. And with that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Mr. Lang?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. First, I think there's been some discussion and certainly was in the advocate information around how we were going to go about selecting our next police chief. And I guess, I think the first thing I'd impress is that the public input time for that was really the mayor running for office, right? I mean, the mayor is our chief executive officer, and certainly policing is an executive function. So, I think it's entirely appropriate that ultimately it comes down to the mayor's selection for our next police chief. So that said, I think once we make a selection, I think it's very important that our next chief take the time to make the effort and make those community connections, connect with the different organizations in our community and build those bridges. But I think the questioning of the selection process, I just kind of would set that aside and just let the executive function play out how it is, and then let the next chief make those efforts and make those bridges. And then I'd also like to thank Superintendent Doug Ute and our principal over at the high school, Tom Bowman, for meeting with us this week to talk about, and for to the high school or to the school system for volunteering that space as an option, whether we use it or not. We appreciate having that option and being able to have that discussion. Also wanted to thank the health department, Olivia Biggs and Chad Brown for joining our meeting tonight. Really appreciate you guys, giving us some input from a health department perspective. And I know Chad was going to try to take a look at chambers this week, so thank him in advance. And then, since we're meeting again, I think we always have to thank Dave Rhodes. I think every week we have to thank him for something. But I know Dave and Don, you've certainly spent a lot of time looking at the chambers themselves and working through all the logistics of those options. So really appreciate all the time everybody's putting into how we meet next. So with that, I'll pass. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. And I also appreciate your high school picture that comes up when you're not on the screen. It looks very nice. Mr. Marmon.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I need to call a finance committee meeting for 2 weeks. Next, I would like to not only thank the employees in the city of Newark, but all employees around the community. I think everybody is working together to get through this pandemic, trying to make sure that everything's up and running. Newark is definitely representing the state of Ohio well. And I appreciate all of those folks who are working hard in the grocery stores, in the gas stations, everywhere. And it's just been business as usual because they have to be there. It's kind of nice to see some of the restaurants opening back up in the community, and whether it be outdoor dining or there's I understand some limited indoor dining. I have not done that yet myself. However, it is a good sign. And then another great sign is that baseball was back down at Don Edwards this last weekend. So there were ball games being played, and they did it in a safe manner. There was social distancing, and there was definitely a number of games all weekend long at Don Edwards, and that was fantastic that baseball is back. So, and with that, I will yield. Thank you very much.
You're muted again, Don.
Might have to unmute that. I had the dogs barking. So thank you, Mr. Marmey. Appreciate that. With that, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Bubb, second by Mr. Marmey. All those in favor, give me a thumbs up. And with that, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 weeks.